Welcome to the first part of this documentary on the REIMAHG factory. On the 16th of October 1946, Fritz Sauckel, born the 27th of October 1894, the Gauleiter of Thuringia and during the period of the Third Reich General Plenipotentiary for Labor Deployment, was sentenced to death during the Nuremberg war trials. During his trial, American Chief Prosecutor Robert H. Jackson described Sauckel as the greatest and cruelest slave driver since the Egyptian pharaohs. Sauckel was responsible for the deportation of more than 7 million people to the Third Reich, where they were used as forced laborers in industry and agriculture. But almost unknown is the history of the REIMAHG, Sauckel's underground aircraft factory, near Kala in Thuringia. Kala, known to date for the production of porcelain, is located centrally in Germany, next to the Saale River. The important railway connection Berlin-Munich offered a good transport infrastructure. Near Kala is the Walpersberg, a table-shaped mountain that is 320 meters high. From 1897 the porcelain clay, kaolin, was excavated from the mountain. In the Walpersberg there were two mining areas. One was the Melzer area and the second one belonged to the porcelain factory Kala. As a result, in 1944 there were a number of tunnels already present, which would form the basis for the REIMAHG project. From 1943, the German war industry was comprehensively bombed by Allied air forces, the British Royal Air Force during the night and by the Americans during the day. As a result of this bombing, the aircraft industry, which was very important to the German war effort, saw its production fall. It was then decided to decentralize the companies. In theory a good idea, but it quickly became apparent that production was even more difficult, as parts were produced in various locations with a loss of quality control and a huge loss of time in transport to assemble the aircraft. The same year, the Walpersberg was placed on the Third Reich's list of locations suitable for underground storage of art and cultural heritage. On the 1st of March 1944, the Jägerstab was founded in response to the growing production problems. Their task was to combine and increase production as quickly as possible, as well as the relocation of production facilities into underground factories. The Jägerstab became directly responsible for the planning and implementation of these projects. Sauckel, responsible for providing the necessary workers, and Albert Spee as Minister for War Production, were among the leading staff. The activities of the Jägerstab resulted in a massive increase of production that despite the mass bombing by the Allied air forces. The success of the Jägerstab was such that Spee later renamed it the Rüstungsstab, which coordinated the entire war production. In 1944, the German war industry output was the highest of the entire war. Sauckel, meanwhile, had not sat still in Thuringia. In 1936, the Wilhelm Gustloff Foundation was founded, systematically incorporating all major industries, such as the Simpson small arms factory in Suhl and other companies. In 1939, the foundation was renamed to Wilhelm Gustloff National Socialist Industrial Foundation and thus became almost the largest armament company in central Germany. In 1944, the AGO aircraft factory in Eschursleben, where the Focke-Wulf 190 was produced, was taken over and integrated into the foundation. Sauckel now had a very broad network of factories, workers and expertise, the ideal basis to start his own project. For this, however, he needed support, and he found it with Hermann Göring, head of the German Air Force and one of the most powerful figures in the Nazi Party. A week after the creation of the Jägerstab, Sauckel wrote to Göring and proposed his underground construction project. In the framework of the Jägerbau program, as head of the foundation, I have tasked the Gustloff Foundation to start immediately with the production, as foreseen in the program. The production can be realized near the town of Kala in the tunnels where the porcelain factory excavated kaolin. The tunnels already present are on average 3 to 3.5 meters wide and 3 meters high and can be widened and extended. The total amount of available space is 10,000 square meters. The tunnels are absolutely dry and can with little effort become dust-free. The mountain covering the tunnels is an average of 35 to 50 meters of solid rock. I ask you for authorization to immediately launch this project by the Gustloff Foundation and to determine the type of aircraft, or parts, engines. The workers necessary for this purpose will be mobilized very quickly by me, and some of the main staff and experts of the Gustloff Foundation will be attached to this project. Goering became interested and gave his permission for the construction project. Originally the name Construction Project Saarltal was used, but for security reasons the name REIMAHG was quickly adopted, an abbreviation of Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring. Saarltal promised the Jägerstab a monthly production of 500 Focke-Wulf 190 fighter planes and the later TA-152 model. Göring visited the Wolpersberg site on the 10th of October 1944. Some days later, all German newspapers published an article of a new aircraft being constructed in central Germany that had been visited by Göring. On the 11th of April 1944, the first forced laborers, from Italy, arrived in Kala. They were housed in the Rosengarten, a banquet hall. Up until March 1945, their numbers grew to more than 12,000, coming from all over Europe. Barns and halls were being sought all around Kala to accommodate the growing number of forced laborers arriving daily. New camps were constructed near and around the Wolpersberg. Compulsory employment was the result of a policy reversal in Germany. Fritz Saarltal was commissioned by Hitler to find a solution to the lack of labor for the German industry. As of 1942, he resolutely chose to tap into the workforce that was available in the occupied territories. The forced laborers that were deported to Germany resulted from the 1942 decree whereby men born in 1920 were required to work in Germany. Many young men went into hiding but were betrayed, subsequently arrested and sent to Germany as forced laborers. The Italians at Kala was a specific issue, in that civilian forced laborers were sent from the north of Italy, as well as Italian prisoners of war who had been interned in the various camps in Germany since 1943 and did not have prisoner of war status, but were regarded and treated as Italian military internees. For the forced laborers who came from Eastern Europe, the situation was different again. Here, entire families were deported, the elderly and even children in addition to men and women. Since the occupation of Poland, people had been sent to work in the Third Reich, but as of October 1944, the REIMAHG also received people imprisoned after the failed Warsaw Uprising. Slovaks also ended up in one of the camps in the town of Kleindenbach, the furthest camp of Wolpersberg, after the Slovak National Uprising in October 1944. Their camp, however, still depended from the POW camp Stalag 9C in Bad Sulza. They had to travel daily by train to the railway station of Orlamund, and then walk about 5 kilometers to their workstations in and around the Wolpersberg. Work was carried out on the Wolpersberg day and night and was relentless. It was therefore not surprising that accidents happened frequently, victims usually being the forced laborers. The duration of a shift was 12 hours. At the end of their shift, the forced laborers received a meal ticket, which allowed them to stand in line for a meager meal back in their camp. The sick were given half a ration, according to the principle, who doesn't work, doesn't have to eat. The workday usually began at 4 a.m. with a breakfast, consisting out of a poor quality coffee or soup, followed by roll call at 5 a.m. Distribution of workers to the various labor groups followed. Some forced laborers stayed with the same firm for the entire period, but they were usually sent from one to another. At 7 a.m. the columns were handed over to the German firms by the Arbeitskolonnenführer. Most of the camps established from April 1944 consisted of wooden barracks. The camp in Bibra, located on the north side of the Wolpersberg, initially had tents and was only later equipped with barracks. One of the largest clusters of camps was in the valley of the Löwengrund, 2 km from Kala. 4 camps were built there, Lager 4, 5, 6 and 7. More than 4,000 people walked from their respective camps to the Wolpersberg every day. In addition to the mass billeting in and around Kala, houses were built in brick for German workers, but were only partially finished by the end of the war. In addition to forced laborers, there were also foreign volunteer workers and German workers. Sauckel also directed that the Hitler Youth should be deployed in the context of total war. Those born between 1927 and 1930 arrived in Kala in their hundreds from the surrounding region as of October 1944 and worked alongside the forced laborers or guarded them. They were housed in the partially finished camps of Zwabitz, Gempede and the Schindlertal. Upon arrival in Kala, the forced laborers were registered. The system used for this purpose was the REIMAHG system, that consisted of a metal rectangular plaque, on which all kinds of information could be put. For example, the REIMAHG REIMAHG plaques contained a unique number, surname, first name, date of birth, camp where the person lived, what work was performed and arrival date at the REIMAHG. In the archives of the Buchenwald Memorial there are about 1,000 of the REIMAHG REIMAHG plaques. The rest were thrown away when the porcelain factory in Kala was taken over in the 1990s. Close analysis of the remaining plaques gives a very detailed insight into the internal work structure of the REIMAHG, which of course focused on the forced laborers in construction and transport, but also functions such as women working in the kindergarten, cleaning and kitchen staff, cobblers and much more. It shows the complexity of this major enterprise. Meanwhile, almost 3,000 names with their unique REIMAHG number of the REIMAHG have been discovered through other archives. This research is still ongoing. The 12,000 plus forced laborers, distributed across 40 different camps, were guarded. The leadership of the Workschutz and SS was in the hands of Germans, who were under the command of SS Brigade Führer Karl Pflomm. Pflomm committed suicide on the 16th of April, 1945 in Hümelshane, as the Americans arrived, after shooting dead his 6 children, his wife and nanny. The majority of the guards were Workschutz, in which older Germans in particular did their service. But there was also a large number of Belgians, Italians and Russians monitoring the camps and the workers. Some of them were very brutal towards their own fellow countrymen. On the 7th of April 1945, a few days before the liberation, the well-known Belgian athlete Julian Salens was shot dead by a Workschutz at the Lager E camp in Ekenberg. Near the Dennermühl, close to Ekenberg, the SS set up a penal camp, called Lager Zero, where forced laborers who were caught stealing food, or did not want to work etc., were sent. It was a small camp, in which a tent was centrally placed, surrounded by barbed wire. The forced laborers who ended up here had little chance of survival, partly because of the even harsher labor and daily abuses. Later this camp was moved to a tunnel in the Wolpersberg, the so-called Strafbunker. The SS ensured that prisoners never died in the Lager Zero, but were sent back to their camp, where many did not survive the hardships suffered. The very harsh and inhumane working regime, the abuses, but above all the inadequate nutrition, lack of medical care and unhygienic conditions led to more and more people dying in the winter of 1944-45. Although there were infirmaries and sick barracks in the various camps, they hardly had any drugs or properly trained staff. The diet, which was already inadequate, became even worse. In Kala's communal cemetery, a special area was set up for the REIMAHG to bury the numerous forced laborers who died. Provisional cemeteries were also set up around the camps, which were not discovered until 1947. How many people died during the REIMAHG period? From April 1944 to April 1945, is still not clear. During the East German period, the death toll was considered to be 6,000. However, this is a huge number, compared with the 991 people officially recorded by the German civil authorities. This suited the political situation of the GDR times and for many years was believed to be true, without clear evidence. Current research, still ongoing, has now identified a more realistic number of around 1,400 people, which nevertheless is still a high number of deaths. From the winter of 1944-45, food was only given twice a day. The number of sick and injured was reaching dramatic proportions. As early as August 1944, the News-Jagdschloss Castle, in the small municipality of Hümelshane owned by the Vogelverlag publisher in Postneck, was rented by the management of the REIMAHG for the duration of the war. Wooden barracks were built in the beautiful adjoining park for the sick forced laborers, while German staff who needed medical care were nursed in the castle itself. Nurses from the German Red Cross were sent to Hummelshane from all over Germany, as well as medical staff with forced laborers for maintenance. However, they had almost no medical supplies, which meant that forced laborers in particular suffered. After the US Army arrived in Hummelshane, the hospital was taken over by medical units and run as a displaced persons hospital until the 1st of August, 1945. In total 176 people are registered as deceased at the company hospital of the REIMAHG in Hummelshane. They found their last resting place in a field of honor next to the municipal cemetery in Hummelshane. This concludes the first part of the history on the REIMAHG factory. Thank you for watching. If you want to learn more, then visit our website at www.wolpersberg.de. You can also follow us on Facebook or contact us by email at info@wolpersberg.de.